Today we have a super exciting topic. We're talking about navigating the frontier of AI innovation, and in particular how we close the gap between this fast pace of innovation and the adoption in industry. And to help me untangle this topic, I'm joined by Sasha Rubel, who leads AI or generative AI policy for AWS at EMEA. And I have Alexandru Voica, who heads corporate affairs and policy for the AI company Synthesia. So welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
So I would love to get your perspective on this gap. Where are we today between this crazy innovation in AI and what is actually happening in industry?
So what we're seeing right now is that AI adoption is actually outpacing the uptake of mobile phones in the early 2000s. So that's an extraordinary effervescence around the adoption that's happening. But in parallel to this effervescence, there's actually what we've called a two-tier economy that's emerging. And that manifests on three different levels. The first is that startups are kind of steaming ahead, adopting AI faster than larger enterprises. Startups are going beyond productivity and efficiency gains and looking really not only at operational transformation, but more fundamentally, strategic reinvention of how AI can help them reimagine how they serve their customers and how they address the question of why. Why should we be adopting AI? What is the problem and how can AI help that? Whereas larger enterprises are still lagging behind in terms of adoption, really stuck a lot of the times at the productivity and efficiency gains phase. So startups and larger enterprise, that gap needs to be closed. The second gap that we're seeing is private sector is really steaming ahead in AI adoption versus the public sector. And this matters for several reasons. One is that when public sector adopts AI, it actually inspires trust, which is one of the biggest blockers to AI adoption, not only from citizens, but also from private sector companies. So public sector adoption can actually help the private sector accelerate AI adoption and make sure that we're really harnessing not only the economic benefits, but also the social benefits that this opportunity represents. The third gap that we're seeing is the gap between tech native, let's call it, and non-tech native companies. So tech native companies are adopting AI at a much faster pace than, let's call it, non-tech native companies or organizations in fields like agriculture or manufacturing. And this matters again because what we're seeing is that in fields like agriculture, this can totally transform the ways in which farmers, for example, mitigate supply chain challenges or address climate change or pest control. There's a great example that I love from a farmer named Matteo in Italy that actually founded a company without any engineering experience called X Farm that uses AI to actually address sustainability challenges related to his farming. And it started in Italy and it's now scaled across multiple countries. And so we're really seeing the need to close that gap because it's a big mistake to see this moment as a technological revolution. It's also a cultural one. So making sure that we're putting technology there and democratizing access to that technology, but also putting people first is one of the key ways in which we can close that gap that exists at those three levels.
Amazing. Alex, you work with organizations all across the world.
Yeah.
Do you also see this gap?
Yeah, so if I look at our customer base, it's really interesting because we have like Fortune 500 type companies, and there it's very diverse. So it spans like automotive, consumer packaged goods, retail. And that's where we see a lot of adoption of Synthesia. But then we also have plans for small businesses and kind of middle-sized businesses. And there we also see how they're using it in very interesting ways. So just to give you an example of the kind of latter case, there's an organization called Just Dig It. They're a small organization, but they help farmers in East Africa regreen land. So one of the challenges there is that that part of the world, they speak multiple languages, and they need to be trained on how to plant different plants to kind of help with carbon capture. And what they've been able to do is they used to record these training videos, but it took a lot of time and it took a lot of effort. And now they're using our platform to make these videos instead. And they put everything on a mobile app, and they just send this mobile app to farmers, and they watch the videos and then immediately are able to sort of get to work. So that's one example of a small company that's moving much faster with AI than they would have previously. And then if I look at the kind of Fortune 100 type customers, I think we have plenty of examples there. And one of them that comes to mind is ServiceNow. So they have an academy type program where they train workers in digital skills. And they were able to cut production costs by 50% by using Synthesia. So they're moving much faster in terms of producing content and getting those courses up on the platform and in front of people. And they have an ambition to train 3 million people by next year. And that's, without that kind of scalability, it would have been very difficult to do. So I think there are kind of encouraging examples, both in kind of large enterprises as well as kind of small businesses as well.
So what examples or use cases excite you when you look at across your customer base?
There's one example that I come back to all the time, which is an example of a startup named Huron AI. Huron AI is a startup that provides personalized treatment and advice for breast cancer patients in Rwanda. It's now scaled from Rwanda to places like Kenya and elsewhere in East Africa, but also places like the United States. And it shows really concretely the ROI on what this technology represents. I think right now there are lots of conversations around what is the ROI in investing in this technology. Rwanda is a country where there's one doctor per 3,200 women who are actively suffering from breast cancer. There is no feasible way for that one doctor to see the 3,200 patients for multiple reasons. One is that a lot of these women are in rural areas, and so they can't come into the city because of costs or because of the rainy season. And the other is that simply the doctors just don't have enough time. And so the doctors have been working with Huron AI to develop a kind of personalized chatbot to make sure that women who wouldn't otherwise have access to personalized medicine can actually be followed with human oversight, not replacing the doctor, but augmenting the doctor's capacity to serve those who are most in need. And I think that's something that I find really compelling. Another example that I come back to time and again when I think about the importance of what this represents, not only in terms of GDP, because we talk a lot about what GDP could be unlocked through AI adoption, but it's more than GDP. It's also the social benefits that this represents, and more fundamentally, the question of human dignity. There's an organization in the United Kingdom called Halo Trust, who worked with a farmer named Mikhail. Mikhail is a farmer in Ukraine who within 3 months of the invasion could no longer farm his land. It meant that he could no longer feed his family. It meant that his daughter stopped going to school because he could not farm his land due to the landmines on the land. And so actually using our AI services, Halo Trust worked with farmers like Mikhail to demine that land and make sure that Mikhail could go back to farming, that he could feed his family, and that he could also empower his community to continue to thrive despite the extremely challenging situation that he found himself in. So when we talk about ROI, we need to think not only in terms of solving the biggest challenges that face the world right now, empowering economically communities and innovators that are closest to the problem, but also looking at the social transformation that this technology represents. What are the biggest challenges that we have, including, for example, accelerating drug discovery that we weren't able to do beforehand, that thanks to this technology, we can not only address, but also accelerate. There's another organization called GenAI who actually saved up to 43,000 hours of research time for drug discovery using generative AI. So I think right now the challenge and the opportunity that this represents is how can we come together across stakeholder groups and across countries, think about what are the challenges that need to be addressed the most urgently, and how can this technology be placed in a democratized way, safely and responsibly, in the hands of those that are closest to the problem so that they can solve them and that we can scale those solutions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you look across industries, across the biggest challenges we are facing, where are you excited about in terms of the application of generative AI?
Yeah, I think it's about scaling. If you think about it, Ukraine is a perfect example because of a country very open to adopting technology and deploying it quickly. And just to kind of follow up on your example, we had a similar case where the Ministry of Social Services in Ukraine, there are parts of Ukraine that obviously are now under occupation, and the ministry was having a hard time reaching the citizens that were in those regions. And they tried to, and they also wanted to train more social workers to deliver programs to their citizens. So things like pensions or kind of child support, those types of services. And so what they did is they used Synthesia to make videos in Ukrainian and shared that content both on social media, as well as they've built their own platform through which they deliver public services, and they were able to train their workers, and they did that in record time, and the impact was amazing. They were able to reach hundreds of thousands of people that they wouldn't have been able to do with kind of traditional ways of communicating, and they did that through video, which is a much more engaging way of communicating versus text. Before they used to send them these kind of like documents, and now they get a much more kind of interactive video with Synthesia. And I think that's what I'm excited about. This opportunity to which AI gives us is to kind of scale, in our case, scale the way organizations communicate, and then actually identify business needs and solve them with AI.
So how do we close this gap, and how do we scale AI, and what are some of the barriers that we need to address? So if you look across the organizations that have done this really successfully, what sets them apart?
I think for the first part of your question, in terms of what needs to be done, there are three key things that we see as absolutely necessary. One is obviously accelerating private sector adoption of technology and making sure that we're closing that gap. Part of closing that gap includes making sure that individuals have the digital skills necessary to be able to not only understand what AI is and isn't, but also what it means to develop and deploy it responsibly. So it really starts with empowering the workforce to understand what this technology is and how it can help them. I'll just share a quick anecdote on that. I was talking with a chief data scientist of a very large legacy organization, and she was explaining to me that this organization was very slow in adopting AI and very reticent in terms of what it represented. And I asked her, well, how did you do it? Because you did it and it works and it's scaled. And she said, Sasha, it's very simple. I sat down with 3,000 employees for half an hour each in this organization, and I asked them what they hated the most about their job. And then I used AI to automate it. And so it was an incredible example of how we really need to start with people in terms of buying into that organizational transformation. And it goes for private sector adoption, like for public sector adoption, where a lot of legacy institutions exist. So closing that gap and empowering the workforce to understand what this opportunity represents is something that's really important. So private sector adoption and accelerating that, first point. Second aspect is really looking at how to modernize public sector adoption of AI and accelerate it. I talked a little bit earlier about how public sector adoption inspires trust, but beyond inspiring trust, public sector adoption can actually help the government deliver on what is their most fundamental mission, which is to deliver value and become closer to citizens. So my 96-year-old father, who does not understand email, does not understand video streaming, is using a generative AI chatbot to access his Social Security benefits. If you ask my 96-year-old father to understand the Social Security website of the government, he would be completely lost. And so it really represents an opportunity to accelerate what fundamentally is the mission of government, which is to unlock benefits for society more broadly. And we see that in, for example, the UK, the ways in which the NHS is adopting AI to help do triage in their emergency rooms. And this is just one of many examples of the ways in which really it can unlock not only value, but but again, the beneficial use across government. So modernizing public sector technology is absolutely essential. And then the third element that we see is really important is a question of pro-innovation environments. I think right now, one of the biggest blockers to AI adoption is the lack of trust in the technology. And so really making sure that we're addressing that trust and helping citizens and governments around the world understand that actually responsibility and innovation are not opposites. They need to go hand in hand because responsibility drives the trust necessary, which will drive adoption, which will unlock innovation for all. And so convening conversations about what a pro-innovation environment actually looks like, where governments talk with academics, who talk with engineers, who talk with industry leaders about what are the risks that we need to address, what are the most technically feasible ways that in the state of the art of a technology that realistically, Bernard, outpaces any regulatory environment that exists in the world. How can we make sure that we're using state-of-the-art technology to really address those risks and convene those conversations that are absolutely essential so that we have a shared vocabulary of what risk is and how to best address it in this technology so that responsibility and innovation can go hand in hand?
Amazing. I love those examples. How about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is if I can make a comparison to railways and steam engines. Right now, we're hyper-focused on models, benchmarks, and this model is better than that model, and this model is newer than this model. But companies in general, from my experience, they don't really buy models. They want solutions. And so if we want AI to be adopted more broadly, both in the public and the private sector, I think we need to focus just as much on the companies that are building solutions, not just on the companies that are building models. So to make a comparison with engines and railways, we were focused on whose engine is bigger than what engine is bigger than other engine, but without a railway for that engine to sort of go, just building a bigger engine is not necessarily the most interesting thing. And so for us, we're very much an applied AI company. We train our models as well when we need to, but we see ourselves as a video platform that really tries to deliver solutions to organizations that want to adopt AI. So, and I think that's how we're now the world's largest AI video platform for enterprise. And, companies are not making Hollywood movies in Synthesia. When you say AI video, you probably immediately think of, film entertainment. No, companies are making corporate videos. They're making employee training videos, customer support, sales enablement, that type of content. But you wouldn't necessarily think that type of content would create a sizable market. But actually, we're not displacing video, we're displacing text. So the companies that are making AI video in Synthesia, they're replacing presentations, they're replacing Word documents. They're not replacing sort of necessarily traditional video. And if you think of these kind of large organizations, a lot of times, they communicate as if we're still in the 1990s. And with video, they can sort of join the 21st century. And that's been, I think that's been a really powerful way and really useful way of adopting AI, is thinking about what are the problems we're trying to solve and kind of working backwards to the solutions and then eventually the models that are needed for those solutions. That's how we think about it. I
think it's a really important point. I think the organizations that really succeed with the AI are the ones that are stepping back and saying, okay, how is it actually completely potentially transforming the way I deliver value to my customers and how I do business? And I still feel there's so many organizations stuck in, let's try to automate what we already have. Let's try to drive efficiency instead of stepping back. Do you see that too?
I love your articulation of that, Bernard, because I think the question is really how do we move beyond productivity and efficiency gains and really look at how can AI actually help us reimagine how we deliver value? But in parallel to that, how can we make sure that we don't get stuck in a kind of POC purgatory where there's lots of proof of concepts that aren't scaled? And I think right now, one of the things that's really essential is how can we learn from each other about what's working and what's not working, and how can we scale what works? I think right now what's exciting is that the technology is developing so quickly. How can we make sure that we're learning in this experimentation and scaling those learnings across industries? And Alex, I also loved your articulation, because one of the fundamental things that we're seeing, and the author Jeffrey Ding really highlights this, is that the kind of long-term winners in technological revolutions across time are not the companies or governments that have the eureka moment where they develop the most powerful model or the most powerful X, but they are the organizations and governments that mainstream the adoption of this technology across their economies. So that's where the value really exists, is how do we make sure that we're closing that gap between AI innovation, which is an angle like this, and AI adoption, which is more of an angle like that, not only through closing this two-tier economy on those three levels, but also making sure that the policy gaps that exist that reinforce that gap are addressed most effectively.
So when you look across your customer base, the ones that are able to scale your solution and the ones that maybe get stuck in the pilot phase for too long, what's the difference?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things about our platform is that it delivers real value. And the thing we've noticed is that the more you onboard more employees to use it, they discover themselves use cases for the platform. So to give you an example, we have customers who initially adopted for internal communications and employee training. And so they'll make videos on Synthesia in which they, have a health and safety policy or a data privacy policy that they need to train everyone in the organization to follow. But because everyone in the organization has to watch that content, it's in some cases, you need to be regulatory compliant, and it's a good sort of governance principle to be trained on these issues. As they're watching the video, they have not only are obviously they're learning through the video, but they have an aha moment. Is like, wait a minute, I can actually use this. I'm in sales or I'm in marketing. Why can I use this to communicate to my customers?
Yeah, you talked about trust and the importance of closing the skills gap in digital skills. How do we do this? And do you have any examples of organizations who've done this successfully that we can learn from?
So one of the things that I find the most interesting right now occurring in the AI space is a move away from this approach of just AI it towards how do we start from the business challenge and work backwards. But part of that shift, which is the right shift, this culture of why question, is really looking at how do we address the business challenge in a way that is responsible, safe, and secure. And there's a big gap between organizations believing that responsibility is a top management issue. Around 85% of organizations right now believe responsible AI to be a top management issue. But only around 25% of organizations right now actually have internal governance mechanisms in place to address responsibility. And that gap exists for several reasons. The first reason is that we lack a shared vocabulary. And so if I talk, for example, to policymakers anywhere in the world, and I say to a policymaker, do you think transparency, explainability, accuracy, do you think these are important principles? Every single policymaker will say, yes, these are important principles. But if I sit down with an engineer in an organization and I say, can you please have an approach of responsibility by design and embed transparency, accountability, and explainability into your algorithm? A lot of engineers are going to say, can you please explain what you mean by that? And so one of the things that we see is absolutely essential in empowering organizations to centralize responsibility is helping them move from theory to practice. So helping them think through, what does transparency look like for a developer or a designer or a deployer of an AI system? And what does that look like across silos and across the AI lifecycle? So it's one of the reasons why we've really emphasized and prioritized closing the gap that exists between theory and practice by providing educational materials. And to link returning to your question on digital skills, here it's really important to emphasize that it's not just about understanding what AI is or what AI isn't. It's also about understanding what it means to develop and deploy it responsibly. Because the reality is that not everybody is going to be an AI coder, but everybody will, and I would say already does, interact with AI. So understandings around fairness and bias, those are things that need to be absolutely essential in the ways we think about upskilling individuals, not only to understand the technology, but also how to, and sometimes not to use it. So closing that gap is something that's really important. In parallel to that, one of the ways in which we're addressing this challenge is really investing in the science behind AI. And I've been in this field for almost 20 years, and the thing that keeps me up at night and that excites me the most is the ways in which we can actually use AI to address some of the risks related to AI. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We're using, for example, AI to develop bedrock guardrails, which helps filter out harmful content related to outputs of generative AI content. We're using AI to watermark audiovisual generated generative AI content because we share the concern around disinformation and what this technology might represent, but we also see the opportunity in using this technology to address that risk and come together across industry to standardize the ways in which we, for example, watermark content. And here, Bernard, I think it's really important to underline the importance of standardizing the ways in which we think about operationalizing responsibility, because we need to have a shared vocabulary in order to help organizations scale at a global level, which is fundamentally their ambition.
And I guess there's a challenge. And I guess there's a challenge if we don't have regulation across all of these different parts of the world that aligns, that adds complexity, right?
100%. So one of the things that we're seeing right now in research that we commissioned recently is in Europe, for example, 68% of companies in Europe currently don't understand their obligations under the EU AI Act. And because of the lack of regulatory certainty, they actually intend to invest up to 30% less year on year in the technology. They also, in tandem, invest up to 46% of their overall IT spend on conformity questions, on questions related to compliance. So imagine you're a company in Europe and you want to compete on the global stage and you're in a marathon, but you're starting that marathon 46 kilometers behind. And so having a global approach to what responsibility and risk means is really essential because A, it reduces compliance costs, and B, it allows us to have a clear roadmap of what we have to do in order to scale. In Germany, you can drive really quickly on the Autobahn because the rules are clear. And so clear regulation actually allows innovators to adopt AI in a safe and responsible way and in tandem accelerate that adoption. And I think, Bernard, there are a couple of lessons from history that are super important to contextualize why this is so important. The first is actually the invention of standards work, which comes from the UK and the beginning of the train system. So in the beginning of train tracks inside of London were actually laid at different widths because the width of the train track was based on the distance that people estimated of the rear legs of a horse. But nobody could agree on the distance of the rear legs of the horse. And so inside of London, you'd move goods and then you'd have to take the goods off of the train and then reload them onto another train with train tracks of a different size. And so it meant that goods didn't get to people quickly. And it stalled the delivery of value, sometimes food that went bad because it took so long to get there, because there was no shared definition or shared understanding of what that risk represented. And so I think work, for example, of the International Standards Organization is really important because those are the compliance details that help organizations say, I would like to scale my incredible solution from the UK to France and Germany and Brazil and the United States. Here's the roadmap. Here's the mapping of risk. We have a shared vocabulary and we can go quickly. So that's something that I think we can draw from history. The other example, which also comes from the United Kingdom in the mid-1800s, is the introduction of the Red Flags Act. So in the middle of the 1800s, when cars were first introduced in London, there was a regulation that said, we don't really understand the risk yet of what this car thing represents. We are going to limit the speed limit of cars inside of London to 2 kilometers per hour. And in front of the car, because we're not really sure of the risk, we're going to ask somebody to walk in front of it, blowing a horn and waving a red flag to warn everybody that the car is coming. What happened fundamentally is that A, people didn't use cars, they walked because it was faster. And B, other areas, such in France or Germany, steamed ahead in the production of their car manufacturing industry, while the car manufacturing industry in the mid-1800s in the United Kingdom stalled. And by the time the Red Flags Act was repealed, France and Germany had steamed ahead in their car industry and were known worldwide. So clear regulation based on shared definitions and a shared understanding of real risk is something that's absolutely essential. And I would say the secret sauce ingredient to thinking through how can we create this pro-innovation environment where regulation actually empowers responsibility and innovation going hand in hand.
Yeah, I love those lessons from history. You operate worldwide.
Yeah.
Do you see differences between Europe and the US and other parts of the world?
Yeah, one of the things, to your point, one of the things that we did is we became the first generative AI company to be certified with the ISO 42001 standard. So this is a standard that is meant to mitigate AI risks, and it's designed to help organizations deal with managing AI systems. And before we were certified with that standard, because we were the first generative AI company to go through this process, it was actually quite an in-depth audit that we had to go through. But what that enabled us to do is whenever we would have conversations with organizations, especially large organizations, there were always questions around compliance, governance, risk. And our legal team and their legal team would and our security teams would have these lengthy conversations over sometimes months, till we can get to the commercial aspects of the contract. But now that we're ISO 42001 certified, that means that those conversations have been rapidly accelerated, and we can skip through to the kind of commercial, for the most part, skip to the commercial conversation. And so that's kind of an example of how, to your point, these kind of global standards could accelerate AI adoption, because you're not wasting time coming to a shared understanding of the definitions. Because there's a standard, it's very clear on AI systems and their risk, and you've been audited, certified, and everyone has a shared understanding, but also a shared trust. So I think it's not just important to have, I agree with you, it's important to have very clear regulation, but it's also important to have technical standards, because those things actually, in our experience, accelerate AI adoption as well, because they create this kind of trustworthy environment where businesses can communicate. So I think that's kind of one part of it. And then the other part of it has been our experience is we've been around for more than 8 years, and at the very beginning of the company, our founders realized that AI video is a very powerful technology, but it's also very personal technology as well. And they set they set up this framework we call the 3 C's framework, so consent, control, and collaboration. And you could say, to your point, what does that mean in practice? And we got very serious about operationalizing that framework in practice. So for example, for consent, we don't generate non-consensual deepfakes, which are one of the largest sources of harmful content. With control, we give enterprises control of the platform, of their workspace, of how they create AI content on the platform. And then we also check videos before they're generated for any harmful or illegal content. And collaboration, I think it's actually one of those things that, again, it can be quite fuzzy, but we've operationalized that in the sense of we want to work with governments, we want to work with nonprofits and kind of civil society to explain the advantages of the technology and the benefits, but also hear from them about the risks and make sure that we're doing the right thing as well. And that's been for the past 8 years, it's been this kind of a recipe that has positioned us for success, not just in terms of how we build the technology, but now we see sort of the benefits in the companies that do business with us. Because we have these kind of very simple principles and they're very easy to understand, it translates into, again, building trust and adopting the technology as well.
Yeah, great. That's good to hear. They're really good principles, I think, to have. The role of technology then, having the right modern technology stack in place that will enable you to scale. Do you want to go into that?
Sure, and I'll continue on the 3 C's poetic aspect and the alliteration of Alex, because 3 C's also guide the way in which we think about infrastructure, which is the question of choice. So the conviction that organizations should have choice, not only in terms of their models, but also in terms of how they keep their data, where they keep their data, and who has access to their data. Second aspect is really the question of confidentiality. So organizations of all sizes want to know that their data is safe, and they should. It should be a priority. So this question of centralizing security and sovereignty and responsibility by design is really in the DNA, in the ways in which AWS offers our infrastructure services. So confidentiality, second C, and then third, control over costs. Organizations want to be able to pay as you go and control what they are paying for, where they are paying for it, and how they are paying for it in terms of their use of cloud. And this is particularly important when you're thinking about the unbelievable effervescence that we talked about earlier in terms of AI adoption. AI and cloud go hand in hand. And actually, this hand-in-hand approach of AI and cloud also helps regions like, for example, Europe, meeting their decarbonization and twin digital and green transition goal. Because individuals and innovators want to be able to innovate, but they want to be able to innovate in a way that's not only responsible, but also sustainable. So that's something that we really centralize in the ways in which we make available and also expand our infrastructure, is how to empower innovators with this technology in a safe way, but how to make sure that the ways in which they're innovating is also sustainable. And it's manifested in the work and the research that we continue to do on innovations at the silicon level in terms of our chips, Trainium and Inferentia, all the way to the ways in which we think about data center energy efficiency design, which we launched last year in reInvent, and the continued innovations that we continue to invest in terms of renewable energy.
And I guess you as an AWS customer come from the other angle, that you're using this technology to create this modern infrastructure stack, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Synthesia runs on AWS, and for us, it's very important because we offer a global service to be able to have the kind of stability and the control that you were talking about, because there are tens of thousands of organizations that rely on Synthesia. We're not just, in these organizations, we're not like a pilot. We're actually, for some people, it's their day-to-day job to make content in Synthesia. And so it's very important for us that the platform runs smoothly and with good efficiency. And so I think as a startup, what's very important for us is to have access to the cloud and to be able to build services quickly and deploy them quickly. So I think there's been a lot of conversations around sort of sovereign AI and what that means. I think for us, what that means in practice is, rather than building these kind of like supercomputers, which sound good in practice, you're building a supercomputer. If you're doing academic research, that could be a good resource to have if you're a university and you want to build your own model. Potentially a supercomputer could be the way to go. But the challenge with these supercomputers is they're quite resource limited. Like you only have access to one supercomputer. If multiple universities, for example, want to use it at the same time, they might run into some bottlenecks. Whereas if you have this network of data centers that are globally distributed, you can deploy your services at scale. So again, when you're building for if you're thinking about sort of sovereign AI, you should probably think about, first and foremost, how can I, if I'm a country and I want to have an AI industry, how can I help that industry flourish? building supercomputers is probably is useful, but it's not sort of the only thing you should focus on. Probably another thing to focus on is how can I allow more startups and scale-ups like us to grow and deploy their services. There are a lot of companies, or there have been a lot of companies previously where, you know, they had these kind of local ambitions or regional ambitions. I want to be the Uber of the UK. For us, I think it's much more important that we have, in Europe at least, that we have companies that have global ambitions. I don't want to be just a company successful in a country or region. I want to be successful globally. And if you have those ambitions, having an infrastructure that you can rely on that's distributed globally is really important.
Yeah, so we talked about amazing use cases in generative AI. We talked about the key things that will enable organizations to scale it, from starting with the why and the strategy to making sure people are on board, have the right skills, the right regulatory environment, the right culture, the right IT infrastructure. What's next? So I'd love to talk about the next frontier. Generative AI is amazing. What everyone is talking about now is agentic AI. So do you want to give me your view on what's next and why agentic AI might be the next big thing?
We're super excited about what's happening in the agentic AI space, not only in terms of what our customers are doing with agentic AI, but also with the rollout of Agent Core at AWS. There are examples already of the ways in which there are very concrete ROI in terms of the deployment of agentic AI, including in areas like cybersecurity. There's a startup in France that I'm very inspired by named Mindflow, who are actually deploying inside of large enterprises agentic AI to help them with one of the biggest challenges that exist right now, which is questions related to cyber threats. So using AI systems with increased autonomy that actually improve based on feedback to address something that would almost be impossible on a human level to address, because there are so many cybersecurity attacks that happen I wouldn't even say minute, every second. So how can we automate the ways in which we're mitigating those risks? Mindflow is doing that at enterprise level. And that's something that we see already, not only in cybersecurity, but also in, for example, accelerating drug discovery. And, you know, the time that's cut in terms of research that needs to go into drug discovery or software updates, the amount of time that we even internally at AWS have saved in using agentic AI for software updates is just astronomical. But I think here one of the key things, Bernard, to think about is the ways in which agentic AI is really augmenting human creativity and freeing up time for us to focus on what I would call another 3 C's, which is the question of creativity, curiosity, and critical thinking, and what this opportunity represents in terms of increased autonomization and, in parallel, the human oversight that's necessary, but that also frees us up to focus on some of the big problems that we evoked earlier today.
So how would you define agentic AI, and how would you differentiate generative AI from agentic AI? Because when I talk to customers and vendors, sometimes those lines get blurred. So how do we clarify what's the difference?
Great question. And I think it speaks also to the need for shared definitions. I'm smiling at Alex because one of the biggest debates that occurred most recently in the framework of conversations of the EU AI Act was, how do you define an AI system, but also how do you define general purpose AI? And these were debates that fundamentally lasted years in terms of trying to have a shared definition of what this is. What I would say, without using any buzzwords to describe agentic AI, is agentic AI is an AI system that with increased autonomy deploys and affects tasks, whether that's through API calls or else, and that also actually increases its accuracy through feedback that allows it to improve its results. So it builds on the trend, let's say, of generative AI, but uses models and increased automation to really deliver in a much more productive and faster way end results.
That's a very good definition. If I can attempt another one, comparing it with something that the CEO of Anthropic said. So when he was asked for a definition of AGI or what AGI could mean in practice, he said, imagine having a data center, a country of geniuses on a data center. And if that's I guess a useful way to think about AGI, in my view, a good way to think about agentic AI is imagine having a country of subject matter experts in a data center. Mm-hmm. And what that means is with geniuses, I think the idea there is you have these incredibly smart systems that can give you answers to any question you might have. With subject matter experts, it's not just about getting answers from them, but getting them to do work as well. So to give you two examples of what that means in practice, we're building something called video agents and another product called courses. And the idea behind video agents is that we're combining our AI avatars, which people obviously know us for, with reasoning models. And essentially what you get is this experience where video becomes a much more interactive and personalized experience. If you think of video as, over the last few years, it's been very much, it hasn't evolved much beyond kind of broadcast. People watch a video and kind of move on to something else. We want to add a bit of that interactivity into video. So imagine talking to an AI avatar, learning about a topic, and then, for example, doing role playing. So the avatar becomes your teacher, you become a student, you can ask it questions, or vice versa. Let's say you learned a new skill or you learned some new information and you want to practice what you've learned. The AI avatar could say, let's say you're a salesperson and you want to practice your sales skills. The AI avatar says, pretend I'm a customer that cares about certain things, try to sell me this product, and you can practice with the avatar, and then it gives you feedback. So you did very well in this area, you did maybe less well in this other area. And then you can improve. The avatar can assume all sorts of personas. So it can be, imagine I'm a very senior VP at a company, or imagine I'm a more kind of junior person, and you can adjust your pitch if you're a salesperson again to that kind of persona. And so that's I think one great example of agents that start to become actually useful in this particular case of employee training. Another example is a startup called FlowX AI, and what they do is they build agents in the financial services industry. So they work with a lot of banks, insurance companies, and what's really interesting there is they've built this architecture that combines, again, reasoning models with traditional machine learning. To build AI agents that not only are very good at what they do, so they do things like processing mortgage applications or assessing risk in terms of fraud, but they also learn from subject matter experts and able to kind of improve their intelligence, and also have all the things that you need in financial services, governance and transparency and explainability. And they're now deployed in several banks doing the kind of work that was only possible before with humans. And this is not about sort of necessarily replacing human labor. It's about scaling human labor, because if you think of subject matter experts, there's if you think about the top 1% of your company, those people have a lot of knowledge, but there are only a small handful of them around. And if you can disseminate that knowledge to everyone in the company so that everyone can become a subject matter expert or acquire knowledge faster, that's really important. So you're not replacing those people, because you still need subject matter experts to acquire knowledge. You're just then disseminating that knowledge that they have to your organization, either internally through your employees or with customers. And I think that's really exciting, this ability of AI agents to capture knowledge that we have, and then they're available 24/7. They can do work. They can scale up the work of humans.
Yeah, what an amazing example. Yes.
On a personal level, one of the things that I'm most excited about in agentic AI is what this represents. And Alex, you evoked it in terms of personalized learning. I think this is front and center in terms of how people are thinking about what this technology represents as an opportunity. Big conversations are happening around the world of what the introduction of generative and agentic AI represents for the future of education. I would say, again, that it's really important to double click on the soft skills in terms of critical thinking and creativity and curiosity. But the ways in which we can use agentic AI to offer personalized education to people who are neurodivergent, homeschooled, differently abled, this for me is one of the most exciting areas in terms of thinking through what this technology represents and the transformation of how we live and learn and work.
Yeah, I'm equally excited about this. And when you were talking about it, I can see a world maybe 5 years from now where in parallel to what we're doing here, there would be thousands of our Synthesia replicas of us having similar conversations, personalized to different audiences, which is quite mind-blowing but exciting. You were just about to
I was going to pick up on what you were saying just now, which is that especially in large organizations, you want to have the flexibility to retrain people on specific skills that they need. And especially with technology, things tend to move quite fast. And so I was speaking with someone who runs data science sort of upskilling at a large European company, and that European company has a lot of, for example, mechanical engineers. So they're this is one of the biggest companies in Europe. They have these people who are amazing at what they do. They've obviously gone through universities, studied mechanical engineering. They work as mechanical engineers, but they wanted to upskill them in concepts like data science and AI. And it was very hard because in the organization, there were only a few people who had the skills to do that. And they would have these kind of courses, like in-person courses, but it was very difficult to scale. And the idea would be to switch to this type of personalized learning, where with, for example, those mechanical engineers, you can put together a course led by an AI avatar with the kind of all the good knowledge that the team had, the data science team had, and offer those to those engineers. And the key there was personalization. So the idea is that the AI agent that would handle that not only would adapt the content to the person's needs, but they would also adapt to the way that people like to learn. Because the way I like to learn is probably very different to the way Sasha likes to learn. And so some people like analogies, some people like they're more visual learners, some people they prefer different formats of learning. So those types of experiences, you can build them with AI, and you can offer them to people, and you're going to be much faster at upskilling people than the traditional approach of having a subject matter expert join a Zoom call, give the same presentation to everyone, and hope for the best, basically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So if we then look at the implications of all of this technology for the future of work, how will this change how we work in the future and the skills that we will need? For me, the analogy I always use when I talk about AI to my customers and clients is that it basically gives you wings. So if you have some of the core skills, some of the 3 C's you talked about, but also subject matter expertise, using AI will just elevate you. How do you see that?
So one of the things that is the biggest blocker to AI adoption right now is lack of digital skills. But what I find interesting is that digital skills will actually be more important than your university degree in a couple years. Almost half of the jobs that will exist in less than 10 years, that a lot of them don't even exist yet, will require AI literacy and digital skills. In tandem, there's research that's shown that with AI literacy competency, individuals can expect up to a 42% salary increase. So this represents an enormous opportunity, not only to over-index, I would say, and we see it right now with governments that are really investing in upskilling nationally their citizens, but also in the opportunity that this represents for economic empowerment of groups that otherwise and dangerously might be left behind. We need to make sure that the digital divide that existed with the advent of the internet is not reproduced right now in the AI revolution. And that means a couple things. It means, first of all, making sure that these digital skills trainings are available for free and self-paced. Because one of the things that we found in the research that we did is that companies were coming to us and saying, look, we can't find the skills necessary in order to recruit. In certain countries, in Europe, for example, it takes up to 6 months to find somebody with the necessary digital skills. 6 months in AI years is years, more than dog years, in terms of the pace of technological development. And so companies were saying, we need these skills. But employees were coming to us and saying, we would love to learn, but we don't have the time and the classes are expensive. And so making sure that these classes are free, personalized, perhaps with agentic AI, and self-paced is something that's absolutely essential. And here again, I'd emphasize that it's not just about technical literacy. It's also about understanding what it means to develop and deploy and use this technology in a responsible way. It's one of the reasons why we made our AI Ready commitment, where we make available classes for free that are self-paced for technical and non-technical audiences. It's the same classes that we use to train our engineers and our teams, but also why we place a real emphasis on the need for diversity in this space. We need to make sure that everybody is benefiting from the opportunity that this technological but also cultural moment represents, and make sure that those diverse perspectives are around the table. And that is important for several reasons. One is that the return on investment in innovation increases with diversity. If there's more than one woman on a board, the ROI on innovation is higher. And diverse teams actually make better decisions up to 73% of the time. And so for that diversity to exist in teams, we need to make sure that diverse populations are actually empowered with the skills necessary. So fundamentally, we have a tech sector as diverse as the societies that we aspire to create. And that happens through investing in digital skills. One of the things that we found in the research that we conducted actually is that the demographic that was most interested in learning new digital skills was actually the demographic closest to retirement. It was people over 60. And what that shows is that people over 60 understand that their capacity to participate in the world of tomorrow will actually depend on their capacity to understand and proactively use these tools. In tandem to that, though, I think there's a lot of fear of what this represents in terms of the future of work. And I think there are some lessons from history that we can learn from. As a history buff, I'll share with you just two. One is the invention of the printing press. So when the printing press first came about, the monks that were responsible for transcribing by hand the Bible actually broke the first iterations of the printing press, because I believe in the monks' heads, they probably thought to themselves, what good will they be? What will their job be if they no longer have to reproduce by hand the Bible? But fundamentally, what the advent of the printing press did was it invented careers and industries that absolutely did not exist before. It invented publishing and editing. It invented the possibility to become an independent author. It invented the great field of literature that we all benefit from today. And so fundamentally, what occurs with these kinds of innovations is that jobs disappear. But in the long run, more jobs are created. So the fundamental question is, how do we prepare individuals today for the world of work of tomorrow? And that's through digital skills. How do we empower individuals with the skills necessary to create those jobs and to solve some of the biggest problems that face us now and that will face us in the coming years using this technology. So again, it's not just a technological revolution, it's also a cultural one. And I think here, over-indexing on the cultural dimension of this moment is really important because good data needs good AI, good AI needs good data, but fundamentally good work needs good people. And so we need to be starting with the people that will be designing these solutions. And that starts with making those digital skills available to everybody.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel when you say to people that might not be too digitally minded, digital skills, AI literacy, that all feels very scary and very technical. The beauty is that nowadays it's no longer technical, that you now have interfaces 100%. That anyone can use. You can speak to your AI to create code, to create anything you want. And so what we need to do is we need to give people access to these tools, which are so easy to use nowadays, so they can delegate all the work that they don't want to do, that doesn't add any value to those machines, so they can reinvent the work of the future.
100%. And I think there the creativity, curiosity, and critical thinking, I love this theme of the 3 C's throughout our conversation, is really important. It's about not only, again, the technical skills and the skills around responsibility, but how do we foster a culture of creativity, critical thinking, and curiosity? Because the reality, as you articulated it, Bernard, is that the future of work and the future of this technology will be guided by lots of individuals that aren't necessarily engineers or coders. It is becoming easier and easier to speak to an AI and develop a solution that, for example, addresses the question of farming that we talked about earlier with the farmer Matteo in Italy.
Exactly.
And so how do we make sure that those are the centralized skills and the ways in which we're thinking about this future that fundamentally will be tech-enabled but human-centered?
Yeah. When Synthesia was started 8 years ago, its founders thought that the platform we were building would be used by video editing professionals, so by people working in film entertainment, advertising. But what we found actually was that it was the adopters of the technology and the platform were people who hadn't made, in some cases, hadn't made a video before in their life, and that's kind of was for us was the key to kind of success was to build a platform that, to your point, anyone could use. And it took us, 2 years ago, we were about 47% of the Fortune 100 was using Synthesia. Now, in less than 2 years, we're at 90%. And I think that happened because we built this platform that, if you were an office worker and you're kind of building PowerPoint presentations, within a few minutes, you could be building an AI video instead. Whereas, if we had built specifically for like video professionals, we probably would have stayed, a relatively small company targeting a very sort of niche market. But the fact that we built this tool that it can be used by everyone, obviously responsibly and safely, meant that the adoption in the enterprise was just so much faster because you don't have to be a video professional to use Synthesia. And to your earlier point about sort of investing in skills, I think now it's actually quite funny. Some of these companies, some of the people using Synthesia use it so much that there are job descriptions that say, you used to have 20 years ago, you had to be, proficient in Microsoft Office or these kind of tools. And now as part of the job description, it says, you have to be proficient in Synthesia. And that's kind of a really proud moment, I think, for us.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I see such a positive world in the future where actually work becomes more human, enabled by AI. Do you want to leave us with a sentence or final thought on your view on the future of work?
What I believe, if we come together across countries and across industry and governments, will be the future of work. And what that looks like is building on your example of wings. is an AI that allows us to get rid of all of the tasks that nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to fill in paperwork, and that actually returns us and gives us back time to do what makes us fundamentally human.
I love that.
Which is the creative, constructive, collaborative possibility of us coming together to use this technology to co-create a future that is this tech-enabled and human-centered one.
I love it.
Yeah. What else to say after that? I think I think that's a very good way to end it. I think the other way, in my view, to think about jobs and work is that work has obviously a skill or knowledge element to it. People like to learn and then apply what they've learned in their jobs. But there's also a very strong social element to it. There are very few people who work in isolation. Most of the work happens in a collaborative type environment. And in that type of environment where you're working with other people, you form strong social connections that sometimes, last you a lifetime. So when I think about work, what I enjoy about work is not just acquiring new skills and applying them, but forming connections with the people that I work with or work for. And I think what AI can do is it can help us learn faster. And in some cases, it can help us be more productive, so we have more time to focus on the social aspect, because I think that's what we enjoy as people. We enjoy connecting with other people. So if I can delegate something to AI and I have more time to meet more colleagues and spend more time with them and learn from them and communicate with them, I think that's, for me, sort of an ideal future of work, if you like.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Sasha and Alex. Fascinating conversation. For anyone who ever wants to rewatch this conversation, you can simply go to my YouTube channel, where you can find this conversation and hundreds of others on the future of technology. Thank you.
Thank you.